just to make sure you don't cross the lines. And we have created a curriculum, a lesson plan, making sure that we are staying within the boundaries of what we're allowed to do, making sure that we do not come to convince any child of anything. As I said, we're a non-political organization. But working with these children through their facilitators of the program, which are BA students that have BAs in Middle East history and MAs in conflict resolution, working with these children about the fact about learning the values of respecting the other's narrative. I don't have to agree with it, but I need to respect the fact that he has one or she has one. Leadership, to stop sitting at home on the couch after dinner looking at the news and saying, oh, he doesn't know what he's doing and it's so easy and why isn't he doing it this way? No, this conflict is very, very complex and very not something which is easy to solve. And the feedbacks that we've been receiving from the children are exactly this: learning the difference between offensive and defensive tools, understanding that the tools that I have as Israeli Prime Minister are different than the tools that I have if I play the Palestinian president, the difference between a sustainable independent state and an entity which is not yet independent and not yet recognized by most countries as an independent state. Not working from your gut, not working from emotion, but working from thinking ahead. Every act that I have has a reaction, and so on. So I think that it's pretty obvious from what I told you that I truly believe that IT can be an amazing tool to work when it comes to peace building, especially with youth, when it comes to your question, but especially with youth, whether it be younger or older children. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Oops. I need to get to my E-drive here. Some of you will find this ironic, since I'm about to talk about what's wrong with technology, and I'm going to use a tiny little bit of it. Noam, where are you? Where's Noam? I'm a part of the anti-PowerPoint crowd. But I'm about... Noam and I are organizing an anti-PowerPoint group, but I'm about to do one a little bit. Thank you. Okay, so for those of you who were there yesterday, you heard me comment quite skeptically about the uses of technology in some conflict resolution settings, where I think the goals of ADR are to promote flexibility, creativity, and as Chen reminded me, thinking outside of the box, not inside of the box, and tailoring solutions to parties' underlying needs. The trouble with some technology is that it tends to routinize, rigidify, and put into templates and formulas, resolutions and proposals. Having said that, what I want to do today is pick up on the themes that Orna introduced yesterday and the themes of this conference, and that is broadening our conceptions of what technology is and how it might be used for peace, which is my goal in life, to make peace. We'll see how successful we can be. So I want everyone, as a thought experiment, to sit here and think about all the transformations in technology that you can think of in human history. Whoops, just lost it. See, this is why. So the first and common uses of new technology: cave paintings, the printing press, the Gutenberg Bible. Then we went into mass printing and the book as it circulated. High art and high culture. Talk a little bit about low culture or popular culture. Photography, radio, motion pictures, TV, and as we're talking about here, the computer net, the internet, the World Wide Web, Facebook, YouTube, all those things. Have I left any out? So think about it. Other forms of telephone, duh, thank you. Thank you. This is supposed to be interactive, yes. I left out the telephone, very important. Actually, I have it later on, but so think about it. Every time there's been a transformation in technology. And then I want you to think about for a moment whether each move from one form of technology to another has changed in any way the way we think about things, and what uses have been made of the new technology. So how do you think we went from paintings to book to motion pictures to telephone to radio to TV? What uses did we make of these new technologies? Think about it for a moment. Did we use it for religious purposes? Did we use them for educational purposes, for business purposes, for science, for the creation of culture and knowledge? Well, some years ago at UCLA, where I taught for many years, I heard a brilliant paper done by a communications professor who pointed out that at every one of these stages of technological change, the most common use after the first uses was pornography. I kid you not. So the theme of my talk, I have several hopefully takeaway points for you to think about, is whether technology is used for the good or for the bad. And the truth is, technology is created by human beings. It's a tool. It is many tools, as we've just seen, and these tools can be used for good or for ill. We have focused thus far at this conference mostly on its good uses for peace, and I'm going to add some other forms of technology, actually some older forms of technology, that I think can be used for good. But sadly, I want to mention something we haven't spoken much about, and that is the use of technology for ill. I asked the question for us to think about, is media itself positive, negative, or merely neutral? Merely a tool in the hands of human beings who can be good and bad, peace-seeking or conflictual, demanding war or demanding peace, being nice to each other, being bad to each other. Tools are I see them as the extension of our hands. The technology that we use have gotten more and more sophisticated, so now we can use our ears, our eyes, we can use all of our parts of our body and all of our senses, or just a few of them. But I belong to a group of people who think that media itself is in the hands of people. It doesn't necessarily create good or bad on its own. And here I've just posted a couple of examples. So I'm a law professor and I'm a civil procedure professor in the United States. And one of the issues we've talked about a lot in civil procedure is whether the concept of personal jurisdiction is transformed by the web or not. You don't all share our jurisdictional rules, but in the United States, unless someone does something in your state, you can't take control of them in a court. And we have many, many cases talking about whether simply opening up a web page in a state is enough activity in the state to create personal jurisdiction. And in the scholarship on personal jurisdiction in the United States, about half of the scholars say this is a really serious question, and the internet has transformed the notion of what it means to act inside of the state. And other people say this is no different than the railroad, than the car, I forgot the car, than any other form of technology in the last 100 years. All new forms of technology have challenged the notion of when the state can take control over an instrumentality, over a piece of technology, over an act of a human being to decide whether the court has control. So another thought experiment I leave you to think about is that, does the existence of the internet and our interfacing with people far away from us change legal concepts and any other concept that you might think about if you're a communications person? Or is this just another extension of very familiar ways in which we've had to take in and assimilate new technologies to things that we already have? And I would suggest the same is true of science, human communication, and whether we make peace or war. Human beings have made war as long as they've been on this earth, and they've also made peace as long as they've been on this earth. And with each transformation, I left out weapons. With each transformation of weapons, we've figured out new ways to hurt each other, and with each new form of technology, we have also reached new ways of human understanding and empathy across nationalities, across understandings, across religion, across borders. So all of these technologies can be used for good or ill, and you can think about your own favorites. So here, as an analytic academic, I picked up a little bit on what Orna suggested yesterday. Places where ADR, dispute resolution, and ODR, online, or I'm going to say here just technical dispute resolution, come together, and where they're separate, and where they create positive forces and where they create negative forces. And so I say to you once again, I'm a F2F ADR person. I'm a face-to-face mediator and arbitrator and negotiator. I teach all of that basic negotiation stuff we heard from Moti. So here you can fill into these boxes other things that you're familiar with, but I think it's important here to realize that the technologies we've been talking about in the last few days can be used either for positive good or to create more negativity. So the classic, and you can fill in other things, the classic form of face-to-face ADR in its purest form to create peace or dispute resolution, or here I prefer conflict resolution. We've been saying dispute resolution, that assumes a particular discrete moment in which there is a dispute between two parties or more than two parties. Conflict, I think, is more what we've been talking about here, especially with the intractable conflicts we've been talking about this morning, Sri Lanka, Israel-Palestine, many of the disputes in Africa, and many of the conflicts in many of our regions, the United States as well, were long, long conflicts. They consist of many internal disputes, many issues within the conflict, so I just prefer conflict to dispute. Then we have what I have heard lots of in the last couple of days, combined uses, hybrid uses of ADR and ODR. And that's one thing I think this conference has been wonderful at expressing. The field ODR came from ADR, but it is both bigger than and smaller than ADR. Dispute resolution, which began by assuming that people were face-to-face and talking directly to each other, was then taken, and we've heard, the templates that then went to the internet in mediation, arbitration, and negotiation formats. But we also have heard how ODR has been used in a whole variety of other settings. Conferencing, meetings, and in another field I work in, deliberative democracy, enabling large groups of people in communities to participate either through conversation, threaded conversations on the net, or voting procedures, such as a group that in the United States called America Speaks, which has run meetings of thousands of people. For those of you not familiar with it, following September 11th, after the World Trade Center came down, America Speaks facilitated a meeting of thousands of New Yorkers in the same room, face-to-face, thousands of people sitting at round tables, discussing in a deliberative way what kinds of uses the land should be put to, what messages the architect should get about restructuring the buildings. And America Speaks, using technology, using voting devices, and using facilitators, mediators in person, managed to create some consensus out of a lot of different and discordant discussions about what the goals ought to be for what ought to go on the land, building a new building and also building a memorial, and recognizing what had happened on September 11th. A model for democratic deliberation that can be used post-conflict as well as during conflict. So that was a mixed ADR, ODR example. Multiple parties, multiple issues, using technology, voting, those little voting panels, but also being face-to-face, and also permitting some people to participate by telephone. Another example of mixed ADR, ODR I heard yesterday when I went to Leal's section. I have played with the Peacemaker game, and I have heard about its use in some classes in the United States as well as here. And I asked Leal about a group I've been working with here, and that is the Parents Circle, which is a group of Palestinian and Israeli families who have lost loved ones in the conflict. And they are a peace and reconciliation group too, about 500 families altogether. The survivors go and tell their personal narratives in very moving ways. So it is a face-to-face narrative form of conflict resolution. And as Leal told me, one of the interesting ways, again, of combining technology and face-to-face dispute resolution is the hope that after playing with the Peacemaker game in classes where the students may not be able to meet with each other across borders, following playing with the game, some of the members of the Parent Circle would come in and actually tell their stories. The way Parent Circle works, they always work in teams. There's always one Israeli and one Palestinian together, so that their stories of loss are narrated together. So here I put that also in a mixed ADR, ODR category, combining technology with real-world, real people stories. Then there are many of the stories we've heard and the illustrations we've seen in the last couple of days of ODR, or the use of technology to create peace. And what I put in my little analytic cell here is my sort of other important take-home point. And that is for those of you who have not heard that in the United States, many of us have changed the A in alternative dispute resolution to appropriate dispute resolution. so that we would begin to be analytic and thoughtful about when we would use technology for dispute resolution and when we would stay with face-to-face forms of dispute resolution. So the skeptic that you heard yesterday, that's me, who prefers when I can not to use technology, recognizes that I've been using technology in much of my work. I am an ICANN arbitrator, so I have arbitrated online. I have used some of the interactive computer programs in my classes. I have done distance training, as I was explaining to Alberto yesterday. I have done training to Argentina from the State Department in the United States. So I can't say I've never used it. The question is, when is it appropriate? And we've heard many, many stories of that in the last couple of days. When there's high volume cases, and it makes no sense to bring thousands of people into a room. And I've worked on big mass class actions in the United States where technology has been used to formulate categories of claims so people can meet in similarly situated claim groups. Technology is appropriate for education, as we've all seen. We've been using it. We've been learning from each other through technology. Not all of that needs to be done in person, as we just saw demonstrated this morning, listening to our colleagues who couldn't be with us. And I'm about to say that when I go back in a couple of minutes to some of our own older forms of technology, films, TV shows, movies, both fictional and documentary, that we can create empathy sometimes through media, through technology, when we can't have face-to-face conversations. So it's important to think about, particularly here, when we find passage from one part of the country or land to another impossible through border checks and other impediments, that we may need technology to create empathy across border. And we've heard some of that conversation this morning. So although I began, as you heard yesterday, being somewhat skeptical, these are all, for me, situations in which the use of technology or online dispute resolution are appropriate, perhaps because they're all that's possible, or because they support and facilitate what we hope will be a stage project, as Leal has just described, where we begin in one medium and then we move on to another. Now, having said all those good things, and I'll come back, I have a couple of other good things to say, as I said to you, I think we have neglected at this meeting to focus on the negative. And that is the extent to which both face-to-face conflict can be very dangerous, violence, killing, hitting, hurting, speaking bad words. Those are all negative forms of conflict enactment that occur when people are in the same room. We can have the same thing with mixed ADR and ODR, and that is, as I've said earlier, the rigidification and the use of formulas and templates that can be used to control, to contain, to put disputes into the categories that fit into the boxes on all of those websites when you have to fill out information that do not permit the human being to express everything about his or her problem. That is a negative side of mixed ADR and ODR. And most importantly, I just want to make reference to something which actually is which is very well located here at Haifa. A few months ago, I was at a wonderful conference like this one on conflict resolution in media, and I learned from a professor of communications at Haifa, Gabriel Weiman, that there is, and he's written a wonderful book, scary book, called Terror on the Internet. I don't have every one of his statistics, but you might be interested to know that he's been tracking all of the sites, all the websites promoting terrorism and sharing information about how to commit terror acts and trying to encourage people to become suicide bombers and to engage in terror acts. When he began this work some time ago, there were 50 terror sites, and I believe he said when I talked to him in March there are now over 5,000. He and some of you may be in the room, and his students keep up continuous tracking of these sites. And when he came, he's now at American University, living not far from me in Washington. When he came to Washington, he obviously has been consulting for the CIA, and we learned, much to our surprise, that he knows about a lot more terror sites than the CIA does. So I mention that to you because while we've been talking about the positive uses of technology, everyone here needs to think very soberly about the way in which our technology is not something we can control, and that we think of ourselves in this room as the good guys, trying to promote world peace, human understanding, and empathy. And who knows whether we are greater in number than those who are using the same technology to promote hate and to transmit information about how to create new weapons and new technologies and new ideologies to hurt us even more. So, I just want two other sort of general comments before I conclude. I think that where we can, I'm going to disagree with myself in a few moments, we need to use our technology to mediate our conflict, and that is to think about all the different media that we might use. And I just want to say, again, a few words about some media and technologies we haven't spoken of much in the last day and a half, and that is some more traditional ones. So as we've heard here today, through Lael and others, Internet cross-border communication with children and adults. Parent Circle has a website of adults speaking to each other from Palestine to Israel and back and forth. Also, some of it became quite testy and complicated during the Gaza war. But I read a wonderful children's book. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this book. Valerie Zanetti is a French woman who wrote a book called A Bottle in the Gaza Sea. And I have Peacemaker up here as an illustration of this too, promoting internet cross-border, cross-cultural conversation. In this wonderful children's book, an Israeli girl puts a little note in a bottle and sets it out to sea out there, very old-fashioned. And of course, her hope is, and it happens, it's picked up in Gaza by a Palestinian boy. And the book is an epistolary novel about their email communication. So this is a fictitious wonderfully written novel about an internet conversation, taking up the oldest form. That's where the novel began, at least the English novel. The English novel began with letters, if you think back to some of the first novels. And this children's book, which I now give to everyone who might be interested in this dispute, very nicely shows about how children perhaps can use either Peacemaker or websites or other ways to talk to each other across borders. And because it's about just two very individual kids, they have all of the issues that kids do. So it humanizes them, and you see the ways in which they are similar, but you also see the ways in which they are different. And their lived experience of the conflict is quite different. And it's a wonderful, wonderful way to promote understanding in a non-face-to-face way. Then there is the old-fashioned form, the film. And there are some wonderful documentaries out there which are being used to educate and to create empathy. Now I put up here two examples that I've been working with lately. Some of you may be familiar with these. One of them is the Democratic Case for Israel, which is based on the book that Alan Dershowitz wrote in response to Jimmy Carter's book. For me, this is a negative example. I recently had the experience in the last few months of being a speaker in the LA Jewish Film Festival on panels about several of these films. And this film, in my view, doesn't have to be yours, is too one-sided. And I say in the United States it's a quite dangerous film because it's shown principally to audiences that already agree with it. So I don't think it's serving the purpose it was intended to do, which is to educate people to see Israel as the only legitimate democratic nation in the region. And I think the idea really is to increase the already enormous support for Israel in the American Jewish community and beyond the Jewish community. And potentially very dangerous because for me it's an example of a one-sided form of communication, which again is another negative form of use of technology. Very vivid. Al Dershowitz is a very persuasive person, for those of you who have never seen him, and I think, for myself, it's dangerous. Watch it yourself and see what you think. Contrary is a documentary called Counterpoint, which is the story of the Parent Circle, and I think does a very good job of trying to be very balanced in the sense, as I told you, that when the Parent Circle works and tells its narrative, there's always an Israeli and a Palestinian together, and the film goes back and forth. The film shows what life is like at a checkpoint and coming in and out. I think very well done. Now, fiction. Fiction is another way to create empathy and potentially to promote peace and goodwill without face-to-face communication in an educative way. And I'd mention here, for those of you who haven't seen it, the Israeli film, I don't know what it's called in Hebrew, Lemon Tree, which is quite wonderful and is being shown widely in the United States in discussion groups and film festivals, and it's a story of a Palestinian woman with a lemon tree right up against the wall, and I won't spoil it for you, but you should see it. again, I think a film which tries to tell the story, a single story from inside two sides of two real people and how they experience it. Good Intentions, I don't know how many of you saw it, is another project of the Parent Circle. It was intended, it was shown, originally planned to be shown and then canceled when the Second Intifada began, a fictional TV show about two TV cooks, one Palestinian and one Israeli. And while they put on a cooking show together, the show, as we say in media analysis, opens out and shows what their lives are like. It was a fiction, but because it was suppressed during the Second Intifada, they then made a documentary called Making Good Intentions, which is a documentary about what happens when you try to make a film across the Palestinian-Israeli divide, and the wars and the politics prevent the show from being shown. So it's, again, another form of using technology to... it was shown.
Yeah, a few months ago.
Oh, excellent, good.
Yeah.
So it's another...
Media.
Excellent. So it's another form. These are just some examples. Others of you I know work with NGO Search for Common Ground in Washington, did a similar project of doing a documentary to be shown on both sides, Palestine and Israel, about very concrete problems, the water problem, infrastructure, education, those sorts of things. I want to add quickly one other category to the film category, and that is what I would call intentionalist films. I don't know how many of you have seen another wonderful documentary called Promises, which was made by B.Z. Goldberg, who grew up half in the United States and half in Israel. In the year 2000-2001, he followed a group of Palestinian and Israeli kids on both sides. I call it an intentionalist film because as a mediation teacher, I show it in my classes for a number of reasons. One is, again, the idea of showing the reality of both sides through the eyes of different experiences. So there are five Israeli Jewish kids and 5 Palestinian kids, and they range the whole political spectrum. So it shows there's not just two narratives, but multiple narratives within each side. I call it an intentionalist film because when B.Z. Goldberg started to film it, I think his intention was to do a documentary and just to show it. And by the end of the film, he's brought several of the children together. And so for me, it raises, for those of us that are mediators in the audience, it raises the question of the mediator as evaluator or facilitator. So he begins as a passive documentarist filmmaker, and then through the use of film, through the use of technology, brings the children together. That's not such a happy story either. Promises was nominated for the Academy Award. The children all went to Hollywood. They stood on the stage, and then the Second Intifada happened. And as I understand it, nobody's been speaking to each other since then. So, as I said, I will conclude. My take-home message here, or at least one of them, is to think about all that we've been listening to for the last day and a half, and to go back to how ADR was first constructed. No longer do I think of it as alternative dispute resolution, but what is appropriate dispute resolution or conflict resolution for the setting? Is it a concrete dispute or an ongoing conflict? What are the numbers? If we have volumes, as we know in eBay and in other situations, then maybe some form of routinized tech dispute resolution will be appropriate, multi-party. What kind of a dispute is it? Is it commercial, personal, relational, state? I call these modern disputes viral. What do we do when state boundaries don't make any sense? Do we use technology to speak to non-state institutions? Are there multiple issues or simple issues like monetization, cyber settle, all we need is a single bit of money to settle the case? Do we need tailored, creative, out-of-the-box solutions, or can we use routinized ones? Do we have proximity of the parties or distance? Do we need confidentiality and secrecy? Or in deliberative democracy settings, do we want to use technology for transparency on the web so people can access and see what's happening? And then finally, what governing norms? We heard a lot yesterday about places in cyberspace where there are hopes that people can govern themselves, the eBay example of the community court, creating their own norms, or do we have certain kinds of disputes that require formal norms of the international legal regime or national or subnational legal regimes? So finally, I will just conclude and say, as I've been saying for the last too many minutes now, technology can be used for good and ill. It can be very creative, it can help us when we have mass disputes, and it can also be abused. And is every bit as effective in creating more conflict as it is in reducing conflict. So we need to be careful about it. I've mentioned Gabrielle Wyman's book, Terror on the Internet. There's a popular novel out now, Anita Shreve's Testimony, which is based loosely on this scandal, for those of you who are aware of it in the United States, of the Duke rape, in which a moment of a sexual encounter in a private school dorm room winds up on the internet. And the novel very beautifully explores how that single moment on the internet changes the lives of many, many, many people by making a very private act public. So I said that's a counterexample to my basic argument. Here one could say the substance, the change in the technology, being able to put very private moments up publicly has actually changed the substance of the dispute. So I leave you with the thoughts of thinking about all we've learned about the creative uses of technology, to think about what are appropriate uses of technology, what are best uses of technology, how can we mix and hybridize forms of technology with old-fashioned forms of face-to-face dispute resolution. And ultimately, I have to conclude by saying, in my view, people are people. People use fire, people use ice, for good and for ill. And how you use technology depends on whether you are the kind of person who is optimistic and think the glass is half full and there will be peace, or whether you are pessimistic and think the glass will remain empty. It is in our hands to use that technology. I hope we will use it in the more positive forms. Thank you.
All right, now we're way over, so I know Orna's about ready to smack me.
No, we're okay.
Okay, good, because I was about to say, very defensively, we started 15 minutes late, so... Sanjana, are you there? Can you hear us?
You're making assumptions.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. You sound great. All right, so maybe we can just take a couple questions. I know that I'm supposed, as the panel coordinator, I'm supposed to process things. I'm going to condense that into one sentiment. Martin Luther King, a hero of the United States, said, "The arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice." So my commentary is paraphrasing Martin Luther King. The arc of technological innovation is long, but I hope that it bends towards peace. And there are probably bad guys out there right now thinking about how they can use technology to do bad things. We are the counter to that group. So that is my one statement for consolidating everything we're talking about. So why don't we open it up to questions to any of the panelists here. Sanjana is online, so please. Yeah, do you have a question?
I would like to ask one question. Is it possible to distinguish between technical, scientific technology and human technology concerning solving problems, disputes, and other conflicts?
So let me rephrase it for Sanjana. Is it possible to distinguish between more functional technology, scientific technology, versus human technology, particularly...
What would they prefer?
Okay. Well, would the panel like to take that on, or Sanjana? Any comments?
I don't understand.
Well, I guess the question is the humanizing of technology, right? I think the scientific, let me just paraphrase your question and see if I got it right. The sense that technology can be used just for sort of essential analytic purposes, sort of data analysis, versus the kind of human, intermediating human relationships, right? And then which is preferable in the conflict resolution context? Well, I would say the human. It was interesting. There's a quote that I stumbled upon. The guy who invented the internet, I forgot what his name is, Bob somebody or other, but he was actually the creator of the ARPANET. And he said, originally computers were conceived as analytic engines, but they're far more interesting as a way to intermediate human communication. And I think that is really a second-order use of technology. So I think the human technology is definitely the one that we as a group should be more interested in. Anyone else? Okay, other questions? Yes, sir.
I was wondering, are there any Palestinians among the audience?
Are there any Palestinians among the audience? Yes, we have a single representative. Israeli Palestinian. Okay.
I meant Palestinians.
Palestinian, non-Israeli Palestinians. Okay. So we have one. So yes, Nancy.
Sanjana also.
Sanjana.
It was really striking the extent to which poor people around the world have the cell phones as opposed to others. And cell phones are individual communication. And so, and the other television, computer, there's the potential for either individual communication or mass communication. And one of the things I wondered about was how is it possible to use cell phones, to really reach a mass of people?
That's a great question.
Does the technology itself limit the ability of those who can only afford that technology to have that kind of mass?
Yeah, so Sanjana, let me rephrase it. I think there was definitely a lot of interest in the slide, which is talking about the penetration of cell phone usage, particularly in Sri Lanka and the developing world writ large. But cell phones are very point-to-point technology, whereas a lot of other types of technology, like Carrie was speaking about, are mass technologies, where you make a movie and show it to millions and millions of people. And that also affects who can afford the cell phone. So how does the point-to-point aspect of cell phones affect its usage in these contexts?
And just affording is activism. You can have...
Right.
Yeah.
How does it affect activism using those tools? Sanjana?
Well, it's all right. While I'm getting feedback, I hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
It's not either or. I mean, peace building demands that a number of these tools are used in as many ways as possible and creatively. As the last speaker suggested, it is about human creativity and our potential for imagining solutions, and not really the technology that really is holding us back from using these for purposes of peace building. The slide quite clearly demonstrates that, as I said about 4 or 5 years ago, but is inescapable today, that people, even at the lowest economic tiers of all of these countries, either own or have access to a mobile phone. In fact, what is surprising is that it is even more in some countries than a radio, which many feel is far more cheaper to own and maintain because it just runs on batteries. For me, this is really interesting because it suggests that you can have really interesting social conversations on the lines of what has been suggested is occurring in the United States in these countries for very little or no money whatsoever. And it is also complementing what is suggested by the interlocutor when she said that you could play films to hundreds or thousands of people. Yes, you can do that, but I'm interested in what those hundreds and thousands of people then think about that film. And not just immediately after the film, but once they go back, talk with their families, neighbors, and peers. And mobile phones afford a very, very powerful way of eliciting that kind of feedback and carrying on social, political conversations with a diverse group of people around the country. There are a number of programs and technologies as well which do that. I won't go into it right now. Many of them come as open source software. For example, Frontline SMS or OSHA itself. So again, it's not the technology, but the prevalence and the ubiquity, in a sense, of mobile phones, even at the levels where you don't think that they would be so ubiquitous, I think really opens up the door for us in the room that you are in, and certainly where I am sitting at, to try and envision ways in which we use these devices more and more to complement other media and other mechanisms and processes as well.
Anyone else on the panel want to touch on that point? Okay, any other questions from the audience? Yes.
I guess it's a point with respect to the question regarding the neutrality of the media. One thing that is interesting with respect to the use of technology, dispute resolution, and our current conflicts is that, in part, the conflicts are, and this is not going to be anything it's new to talk here, the conflicts about identity. And technology is used currently to maintain and shape and reshape identity. It's clear with respect to film, this intentionalist film or films in general, but also we see now on the internet what we may call identity groups. There is groups that otherwise would have been dispersed, coming together online and finding a place to reinforce each other. And what the sense thus far is neutral, because it happens on the side of those who want peace, but also on the side of those who really want to resist piece. Now, this is not just on the internet. We see mobiles and just heard about the use of mobile phones. You know that in Israel during the disengagement plan, mobile phones and specifically texting or when you text to multi-recipients was used by those who oppose the disengagement in order to coordinate acts of resistance to the disengagement. So the question then becomes, not only is technology neutral or not, but to what extent are we sensitive to the identity building aspects of technology and at least recognize it, harness it to our own advantage or not, but at least recognize the identity element that goes on here, which then makes the resolution of the conflicts either more or less complex depending on our awareness of this dimension.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree more, Amnon, you know that. In some of the analysis of this, one of the categories I didn't get to was the way in which identity groups, as you've described them, have both assisted diaspora communities of all kinds from coalescing beyond borders. So again, beyond border communication can be empathy creating and cross-identity and cross-nationality and cross-religion. There are communication scholars now studying the opposite effects, which is that groups that are dispersed physically actually wind up being very unified through the web and through identity groups. I can't tell you how much, I see it every day in the United States where we are, in a less violent way, continuing the Palestinian-Israeli dispute in the United States as Palestinian Americans and Jewish Americans participate on panels like this, and in some respects, sometimes are often far more extreme than anything I hear here, because the distance actually increases the desire for identification with, and the reluctance to do what Tibi Livni just described, compromise, because if you don't live here, it's much easier to stay more rigid about the position. So I just agree with you. On the other hand, I would say, so I think that's a danger of the uses of the technology to enhance identity groups and sometimes make them worse by unifying people. While other people call it community building, it also makes for intensified groups beyond borders. At the same time that some of this media also creates more complex identity. As an example, let me just tell you that, as some of you may know, the United States takes a census every 10 years. What you might not know is that those census categories have not been constant since they began to be taken. Sociologists will tell you every 10 years another identity group has argued, no, we need to be recognized. So the meaning of Hispanic, Latino has changed over time in the United States. Whether you are religious/American, a European/American, an African/American has changed. So the whole idea of identity is also one that is contested, and some of these media actually help people raise those issues. So in some places, identity is getting more complex, and I personally think that's a good thing as a cosmopolitan.
Let's go to Luke.
Thanks. I actually want to build on what Carrie said, and this is what we've noticed in the technology allows us to feel free with multiple identities. Because I'm Moti now, and tomorrow I'm Master Google 76, and at night I'm Double Mummy, whatever. And when you do this throughout times, it develops the skill that you're not only a Palestinian, you're also a Palestinian-Israeli, you're also a Palestinian-Israeli, a negotiator. And in the field of conflict resolution, I think that that's a huge asset. Because when you start a negotiation process, you can always address or hook to one of the several identities that the other person feels free with.
Can I just add, while working with youth, we're all talking and we're adults and we're talking about identity is something that we take for granted. It's not to be taken for granted. For an Israeli youth to recognize the identity of a Palestinian just as a Palestinian is very serious. Vice versa, for a Palestinian to recognize the identity of an Israeli as an Israeli is also. So when we break it down to younger ages, multiple identities are not even relevant before their own specific or singular identity is being recognized. So.
All right, with that, please join me in thanking our panelists. All right, so we've got a quick demonstration prior to going down to the museum, right? So should we come and set this up here? We need to log into the...
Okay. So we can take another question meanwhile.
Oh, okay. Well, we can just take 5 minutes. I can't get into...
Oh, is it just the scale?
No, I got to put in something.
And if you press... Oh, okay. David press. Okay.
אבל אנחנו צריכים להזיז את זה לשם. את רוצה להעביר עוד את המצגות? קדימה, מתי שהוא יגיד לך? כן.
Folks, after this, we'll take you for lunch with us. It'll be a quick sort of lunch. We'll have a few minutes here and take our lunch with us. And we'll have a tour of the Hams Museum for 1, a few minutes before 2. And then three of us will split with you into the different rooms. So you may want to look at the program and decide on the next panel if you wish to sit in on.
Meeting you all, and just want to say thank you as well to Colin and John and Daniel and others who've been blogging and tweeting, which has made me feel a bit closer to you all, and I hope that next year I'll be able to be with you in a more physically embodied form. So I thought that I'd just like to talk about debate graph in the way that we've been talking to policymakers in the UK and the US and elsewhere, and then begin to come up at the end just to talk about the way in which we're starting to begin to apply it in the exploring the Middle East peace process. So debate graph is a tool that lets people share and visualize and build on each other's thinking, and addressing particularly the area of public policy. And the reason why this kind of approach is we think is so important is because of the slides. If you go to the next slide, to misquote Bill Joy, that there are always more smart people outside government than within it, and at a time when public policy issues are becoming more complex and non-linear and interrelated, the ability to be able to tap into this intelligence that's distributed through the community, and to do that in a way that is transparent so that everyone can see that everyone is a very effective and efficient way of addressing public policy in a way that's just simply not been possible to do before. And because it's transparent, and because it can happen in a way that everyone can see the different ideas have been seen and represented, it's also a process that we think helps to build public trust in the process. If you go to the next slide, the trouble is, though, if you have all of these ideas that are distributed throughout the community, how do you make sense of that? How do you find the ideas that are there? How do you begin to draw those together into a particular structure that makes sense? And if you go to the next slide, and as well as that, if you can begin to get people to think collectively about the problems that we face as a society, how do you make sense of it if many people speak at the same time? So this slide is an illustration of one of the early attempts by the Obama administration during the transition to the questions around healthcare. And we asked a fairly simple question about what worries you most about the healthcare system in the country. And within a few days, they had over 3,700 comments in a very unstructured, very rich, full of anecdotes and lots of repetition within the ideas that were being presented. So trying to think about a different way of making sense of that. And the approach that we're adopting, if you go to the next slide, is to begin to think about instead of focusing on the people who are making the contributions, begin to try and focus on the ideas that are being presented by people. So what we're trying to do is to gather all of the ideas about the particular issues that we're looking at, all of the ideas that are distributed through the community, but to try and do that in a way that each idea is just represented once, so that if you gather a group of people together, you'll find, if you go to the next slide, that typically as you start to talk to a few people, or as you begin to analyse a few papers or submissions, you find there's a rush of new ideas that others haven't raised or discussed before. But as you continue that process, you find that the shape of the introduction of new ideas follows broadly that indicative curve that's described there. And so the line is tending towards a point where you can actually begin to map comprehensively all of the ideas that are distributed through the community, and doing that only once, so that you can avoid the repetition that's occurring. This line is indicative because public policy is dynamic, particularly in areas like climate change, as new science and other things emerging all the time. But nonetheless, even within that context, this pattern we're finding holds well. So, how do you listen to what the community has to offer in this way? And if you go to the next slide, the way we do this is to begin to think openly in simple provisional building blocks on which others can build too, and that are open for anyone to edit and comment on as well. So we're essentially using a form of argument and discussion mapping with different grounds and ontologies involved with it, but the basic building blocks of it are people can ask questions, people can suggest answers in response to those questions, and then people can give reasons for the answers that they're proposing, and then reasons arguing pro and con the different reasons that are presented. So here on this slide we've got an example where we're looking at what are the policy options that are open for responding to the Iranian nuclear program, and one of the suggestions that somebody put onto the site was preventative military action, so a unilateral, multilateral preventative strike to destroy Iranian nuclear facilities. And somebody has come on and put an argument against that. There's a military strength in the hands of those in Iran who argue that the country needs a nuclear deterrent and therefore will lead to a redoubling of the effort to secure nuclear weapons capacity. Each of these points can be open for other people to challenge, to add new ideas, to raise new issues. Once each point is represented in this way, there's no need for others to repeat the points that have been made. And so if you go to the next slide, as well as the representing these ideas in a simple and concise form, the structure of what we're doing also effectively sits over a wiki structure where for each point that's on the maps that have been built, you can add rich text and images and long text to expand on the particular points that you want to make. And people can also layer in comments that aren't part of the structure of the map, but that enrich and explore a method of the structure of the map. If you go to the next slide, what happens then is that people are able to build maps that can move and grow in a multi-dimensional way. So starting with a few issues and then expanding off in multiple directions, with each point that's on the map open to editing by everyone, open to challenge and refinement by everyone, and able to be linked to any other point in any map or any other map within the structure. And this the community can also work together to rate the different issues, so that what you begin to get, and this is a map, for example, that we were looking at in the Independent newspaper of what the Obama administration should be doing in the immediate aftermath of the inauguration. So you can see how it's looking at issues around the environment, governance, healthcare, international policy, and there's a deep, rich branches under all of these elements. as people begin to rate the issues, the visualization changes with the better ideas rising to the top, and so the map can become a multi-dimensional pole where you can understand the issues that people think are significant and the reasons why they think they're significant and the best proposals in the community's perspective for addressing those issues. Also, by externalizing your thought in this way, you can receive alerts that tell you when other people are building on the thoughts that you've shared in this way. And so the map enables the community to try and map all of the different perspectives that are live within any public policy problem space, and to begin to explore those together and to try and see each of the different perspectives that have been presented in the context of the whole and from their own perspective as well. If you go to the next slide. In addition, we built in... yes?
David, we have 3 minutes. I'm really sorry. We will have to vacate the room in about 3 minutes.
Okay, I can cover that very quickly. We built a lightweight widget that enables the debates to be embedded and distributed around the web. So we're working on the map that's shown here on climate change with the independent newspaper, and the map that you can see there. If you click on the bubbles, they explode and move off in different directions, and that map is being embedded on sites in Brazil, New Zealand, America, and Sweden, and embedded on sites where people have different perspectives. So it's embedded on climate sites and environmentalist sites, so that it's aware engaging people in, so that when they make contributions to the debate in their own context, it's updated for everyone in a different context. So it's challenging group processes like homophily, like-minded people coming together, and the polarization towards extremes when like-minded people talk together about issues. If you go to the next slide quickly. Sorry, we can skip through. This is just some of the people that we've been working with on the project. So if you go to the next slide. We've started to build a map about the Middle East process in the Independent, and one of the things that I was really keen to come and talk to you all about was the process of beginning to engage institutions and individuals in the process of layering in all of the different arguments. The map started with a few branches, it's expanded out now, but it's still a relatively immature map. But over the next few weeks and months, we'll be working to try to map all of the different peace proposals that have been proposed, the salient issues that are live within the situation, and the arguments that are being presented for and against those. So the thing that I would be really interested to get feedback from people, perhaps by email or by Skype at a later date, would be people who would be interested in learning more about the tool and perhaps contributing to this process. Final slide, we're Creative Commons project. It's a social venture, and I really wish I was there to follow up with some questions with you, but I hope you enjoy the trip around the museum.
David, many thanks for doing this, and I'm sure people will email you. We will distribute your email to the participants if that's okay. And people will email you with questions later on. Thank you.
I'd be really happy for that, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon.